بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I start as always in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I send peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We live in an era dubbed as the digital age. We have access to more knowledge now than ever before. And we have the ability to pull up any information that we desire at our very fingertips. But this also causes many issues, such as the fact that misinformation is also at an all-time high. But as Muslims, how do we respond and react to this? Perhaps the most famous story about the attainment of knowledge is in the Quran, falls in the same surah that we've been covering for the past few months in these khutbahs. We started with Ashabul Kahf and their pursuit of faith, followed by the story of the two gardens and their trial of wealth. But the story that comes after that is perhaps the most interesting. This story, when you hear it for the first time, in fact, leads many to question what's even going on. And the story that I'm referring to, of course, is the story of Musa alayhi salam and Khidr alayhi salam, and the journey that Musa alayhi salam takes in the pursuit of knowledge. So Musa alayhi salam was asked by his people, the Bani Israel, who the most knowledgeable man was in the entire world. And Musa alayhi salam answered that it was him. And the answer that he gave, he of course had every right to give, as he was a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And right here is where we get our very first lesson before Musa alayhi salam even meets Khidr alayhi salam. Let's say that you're sitting in the classroom and the professor asks you a question. You see that no one else raises their hand to answer that question, but in your head you know the answer. So you start to look around at all these other people like you're so much smarter than them, like you're so much higher than them just because you know this answer. Or perhaps you're taking a test and you're the first one to turn the slip in. So you're looking around at everyone else like, man, I was the first one to turn the test in, so obviously I'm the smartest one here. And it's a very toxic mindset to have, especially when it comes to Islam. Perhaps you have more knowledge than somebody else when it comes to Islam, or you're a hafid, or you have some hadith memorized, or you hold some kind of leadership position at an Islamic organization, and you start to look down at other people because of it. But this shows us that if someone like Musa alayhi salam, who is a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is miles and miles ahead in status and in knowledge than anybody in the world today, that what makes you think that you can think that you're higher than anybody else, especially in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Musa alayhi salam and Khidr alayhi salam embark on this journey, but before they do, Khidr alayhi salam has given Musa this condition. He says that he is not allowed to question any of the things that Khidr alayhi salam does on this journey. And Musa alayhi salam agrees. He says in the Quran, قال فإن اتبعتني فلا تسألني عن شيء حتى أحدث لك منه ذكرا. Then if you follow me, do not question me about anything that until I myself have clarified it for you. So before they embark on the journey, they head to the shore where they need a mode of transport in order to, undertake this journey. And they meet these guys that let them come onto their ship. So I want you to imagine, we live here in Houston where the weather is not always, so nice. We have had hurricanes that we experienced, tropical storms, thunderstorms. So I want you to think back. Imagine that it was the time of Hurricane Harvey. And someone was trying to get into your house to seek refuge. And your street is flooded, all the cars are flooded, the wind is crazy, it's raining so hard, there's thunder going on. And so you let this person into your house. And then all of a sudden, this guy pulls out a sledgehammer and starts breaking the walls, and starts breaking the windows, and breaking the doors, and the water starts to come inside. Obviously, you're thinking to yourself, what is this guy doing? You're going to take some action because you let him into your house and he's destroying it and letting the bad weather come inside. And this is exactly what Musa alayhi salam was thinking. This was his perspective. When they come onto this ship, Khidr alayhi salam starts to make holes into the ship. And out of anger, Musa alayhi salam, he says to him, he's like, what are you doing? These people were kind enough to let us onto their ship, and you repay them by making holes into their ship and letting the water come in. Their ship is going to drown. And so Khidr alayhi salam says to him, didn't I tell you not to question what I do? To not question any of the actions I take? And so Musa alayhi salam apologizes, and he says that he genuinely forgot out of anger. And so they move on. They then come across a boy who Khidr alayhi salam kills. And once again, Musa alayhi salam protests. He exclaims, what did you just do? We just come across this innocent boy and you killed him. And once again, Khidr alayhi salam says, قَالَ أَلَمْ أَقُلْ لَكَ إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ صَبْرًا. Did I not tell you to be patient with me? To not question what I do? And once again, Musa alayhi salam apologizes to him and says that if it happens again, then he will leave. So they come across this town. And in that time, it was common that if there was a traveler in your town, that you gave them, some kind of food, and you gave them shelter for a night, whatever it may be. So they come into this town, and these townspeople completely turn them away. They say, we're not going to give you anything, we're not going to give you any shelter, so you might as well leave. So as they're leaving, Musa alayhi salam and Khidr alayhi salam come across this wall that is falling apart. And so Khidr alayhi salam starts to rebuild the wall and makes it so that it's in perfect condition. And once again, Musa alayhi salam says to him, these people turned us away. Why are you helping them out? Why are you building this wall for them? They didn't even give us food or shelter. Why are you being so nice to them? And so Khidr alayhi salam reminds him once again that, this was the last straw, that this is where our journey comes to an end. But before I let you go, I will explain to you the wisdom behind each of my actions. So the first thing he did was that he put holes in this boat of the people that let them onto their ship. So he explains that the reason he did this was because they were about to come across a town where the tyrant king would seize any ship that was in good condition. So by doing this, he was in fact protecting their wealth. And this represents the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees that something that we consider evil, we will later realize was a blessing for us. Then they come across this boy who Khidr alayhi salam kills without any explanation. And he explains that the reason that he did this was because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him knowledge that this kid was going to grow up and become a great deal of pain and fitna to his family. And in doing so, by killing this child, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to replace that child with a more righteous one. And this is the decree, that something that we may consider inherently evil, and we will consider it evil for the rest of our lives, will in fact, save us from harm. And this bit of harm of this child was actually averted because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had commanded Khidr to kill this child. The last thing that happened was that they came across this wall that Khidr began to build in this town. And so he explains to him that the reason that he did this was because there was a fortune buried on that land that belonged to two orphans that their father had left for them. And they had seen the character of the people of this town. They were the type of people that would have found that treasure and they would have taken it for themselves. So Khidr alayhi salam had built that wall to protect that treasure for the orphans who it rightfully belonged to. And this is the decree, that good things will happen to us, but we don't acknowledge them because we do not recognize them. Now I know that what we're all thinking right now, so what? What do we learn from any of this? We don't live in times where treasure is buried or ships are seized. What does this information have to do with any of us? But we all have these moments in our lives. Moments where we question everything. Experiences that leave us pondering about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing and why He's doing it to us. Why He's putting us through these trials. Events that make us even question our tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in that moment, where we have that shred of doubt, where we question everything that we stand for, we forget the most important thing. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Wallahu khayrul makirin. Wallahu khayrul makirin, that indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your Lord, is the best of planners. Indeed, it is He who is all-knowing. It is He who is all-encompassing. It is He who has planned out each and every moment in our lives. The hardships that we face, the knowledge that we gain, the things that we experience, and that we should never ever question it. We should never question what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has planned for us or what He puts us through. That we should never doubt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Wallahu khayrul makirin. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Today we spoke on the story of Musa alayhi salam and Khidr alayhi salam. But what can we take away from this story? What can we implement into our lives today? Especially as we approach the time of Ramadan. And more importantly, as we draw closer and closer to the fitna of the Dajjal. What do we need to take away from this story to be prepared? As we know that Surah Al-Kahf covers the different fitnas that will come with the Dajjal, the different trials. The people of the cave signifying the test of Iman. The people of the two gardens signifying the test of wealth. And this one signifying the test of knowledge. But what will be the trial of knowledge that the Dajjal will bring forth? It is said that when the Dajjal comes, that it will be a time where what is right will be considered wrong and it will be believed. And vice versa, that what is wrong will be considered right and will also be believed. That the upright and knowledgeable people will be considered ignorant, while the ignorant people will be considered knowledgeable. But what is the solution? How do we prepare ourselves for this fitna? Let's break that down into 3 simple steps. Step 1 is finding knowledge. Step 2 is gaining knowledge. And step 3 is spreading knowledge. Now, as we said, we live in the digital era where access to all kinds of knowledge is at our fingertips. where you can read an article by clicking a button or paste it into ChatGPT so it can summarize it for you. You watch millions and millions of videos throughout your lifetime simply by scrolling your finger. And while all of this is truly extraordinary and can be extremely useful, it also comes with its many, many downsides. One example of this is what we are going to be referring to as TikTok knowledge. That means that you see a bit of information in a 30-second to 1-minute video, or you read some kind of knowledge and you instantly believe it. You absorb it and then you spread it. This is the same tactic that has been used for about 100 years to brainwash the public. A tactic known as propaganda, and it is still being used today. We have seen an uprise, especially of this trend of propaganda when the news of the genocide in Palestine is being talked about or reported on. And while we may not fall victim to it as Muslims because we do our research when it comes to these topics, we do start to lack in other areas. We see a hadith shared on TikTok with no reference given. We instantly believe it and we pass along the information. Yet we wonder how the Dajjal will deceive billions of people. We think that we're too smart to believe it. But if we're so naive that we think that if a politician is our friend just because they say Eid Mubarak or Ramadan Mubarak to us, we're so naive that we believe that they're our friends, that they're here to help us. We're so naive that if we see a video that convinces us that a weak hadith which goes against our morals is true, we're so naive that we've been tricked into thinking that the West are the good guys and the Muslim countries are where the true corruption is. Then what makes us think that we're not so naive that we won't fall a victim to this trial? What makes you guarantee that you won't believe that too? It is said with the trial associated with knowledge that when the time of the Dajjal comes, what will be right will be considered wrong and will be believed. And we see that every single day. Where wrong information is considered right and people believe it. Where right information is considered wrong and people believe it. Where knowledgeable people are considered ignorant. Where ignorant people are considered knowledgeable. But how do we save ourselves from this? And the craziest thing is we've probably given this exact recommendation to dozens of people, yet we fail to do it for ourselves. Whenever we see someone with a flawed perception of Islam, or the wars being waged against Muslim countries for the past few decades, or the misconstrueds and the misconceptions about how we treat women, or even about what they refer to as the Israeli-Palestine conflict, what do we say? Bro, don't be so gullible. Do your research. Or you should really fact check that information before you instantly believe it. But it's time that we took our own advice. Step 2 is gaining knowledge. Now, how do you gain knowledge, proper knowledge? Obviously, the best way to do that is through a teacher. Just like Musa a.s. gained this knowledge through Khidr a.s., who is his teacher. Other ways you can do this is by reading authentic books, listening to lectures by scholars, not the small clips taken out of context. I mean, listening to the whole lecture, the 30-minute, 1-hour lecture, where they explain the context. They explain the reasonings and they explain the references. And of course, reading the Quran and the tafsir. And so of course you can gain knowledge by scrolling through social media, but always fact check the knowledge that you're reading. And the best opportunity for us to expand our knowledge is quickly approaching us. The month of Ramadan is only a couple of weeks away. We should use this month of Ramadan to gain knowledge from the proper sources. We're closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to our deen more in this month than throughout the entire year. So use it to your advantage to gain knowledge. Take advantage of it, my brothers and sisters. And the last step we've already gone over for the most part, which is spreading that knowledge. But just to reiterate, don't ever spread knowledge unless you are certain it's true. Misinformation is at an all-time high and will only get worse and worse as we approach the coming of the Dajjal. Do not be part of the problem. Be part of the solution instead. Fact check your information before sharing it. Look into the hadith before you forward it on WhatsApp or TikTok or Instagram or whatever it may be. And lastly, never question what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting you through, the situation that you're in, because it is all part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plans. And to always remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decrees about what we're going through. The first decree, that something you may consider evil, you will later recognize as a blessing for you. The second decree, that something you may consider evil and will continue to consider evil for the rest of your lives, actually averted harm from befalling you. And lastly, the decree that good things happen to us, but we don't recognize them because we don't acknowledge them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always looking out for our best interests. So expand your knowledge and spread knowledge during the month of Ramadan, proper knowledge through the proper sources. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to use this month of Ramadan to remember Him, to draw closer to Him, and to increase our faith. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant sustenance to all the Muslims suffering around the world and to protect them from harm, especially our Muslim brothers and sisters in Palestine. Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا شر ما قضيت فإنك سبحانك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك وإنه لا يضل من واليت ولا يعز من عاديت تبارك ربنا وتعاليت. عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تسمعون وأقم الصلاة.